All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Fraud Boxer podcast. Today is an episode that I've been really excited for. It's all about learning and development, and I have a good friend of mine named Steve Ashton here with me today. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you, Jordan. Yeah, really good.
Yeah, it's good to have you on here. I know this is something that we've been talking about for a little while. You're a busy man, so it's hard to pin you down sometimes. Totally understand that. But I think it's an exciting time for you because you are launching a new product. And I think it's something that is very exciting for a lot of people and a lot of companies. This
Yeah.
is something that I know that I'm super into as a people manager, learning and development. It's really on the forefront of a lot of people's minds, a lot of companies' minds, as they start looking at humans and their people that they have in a better light and making sure that their mental health is good, making sure that what they're telling their employees and such is really impactful for the business and makes people want to stay. So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk a little bit about your history and your thoughts on that. So, shall we?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've got a bit of an odd career. I've kind of gone off in tangents. I always view it a bit like a sandwich, right? So, the first part of my career was spent in learning and development and consultancy, business growth consultancy, specializing for myself in the learning and development field. So, I spent a number of years doing that, traveling all over the world, training people in quote unquote soft skills. So it's things like leadership, sales, communication skills, relationship management, that kind of stuff. And then the company I worked for did a management employee buyout, so we were able to buy shares at a low cost, well, at an opening cost, and then potentially sell them later on, which is what I did. And I wanted to start a career in sort of my first passion, which was performing. So I was on track to go into drama school when I was younger, when I was sort of 18, 19. I got into a couple of good schools. RADA was one, which is a bit
Wow.
like the New York School of Performing Arts type of equivalent over here. It's
Yeah.
pretty much the prestige school. So I got into RADA. I couldn't go because my parents couldn't afford to pay for me to go, and I couldn't get a grant to go. So I decided I'll take a couple of years, save up some money, get a job, and then go back to it. And of course, life takes over. 20 odd years later, I kind of go, oh, yeah, I was going to go to drama school, wasn't I? So I spent a lot of time in learning and development, left that, and then went into radio. So I worked as a radio presenter on a breakfast show. Did that for a few years. And I was also in small radio stations here in the UK. It's not like in, say, LA, where you've got, a dozen really big radio stations. It's like the way that licensing works here is per region you only have one commercial radio station, so you pretty much own the market. And also you do more than one job. So I was managing the sales advertising team and also doing the breakfast show. So I did two jobs.
Wow.
And then I went from that, I went from that into working in television. So I thought, the next logical step is try and get into TV. Now, given my age, I was sort of in my early 30s. I wasn't getting, MTV type of, Ryan Seacrest kind of gigs. So I thought the easiest step to make as an introduction to that would be the world of shopping television, where in the early sort of 2000s, it just exploded here in the UK.
Yeah.
We'd always had QVC and our equivalent home shopping, but there were a ton of what they call reverse auction channels. So a product would come on and it'd say, this product is, £500, and the more people who come in to buy it, the price goes down. It's complete nonsense. It's a complete bullshit scam. But
Sounds like it.
yeah, you'd lower the price to wherever you got anyway. So I worked on a shopping channel that started off selling the usual crap that everybody else sold, but then we specialized in jewelry. And I did really well at that. So then I became sales manager and then sales and marketing director, and then kind of de facto managing director for a couple of periods because we changed managing directors and I sort of stood in for like 2 or 3 months a couple of times. So, and we grew the company from £7 million turnover to 68 in 3 years. So we really exploded. We expanded into Japan, Germany, and the United States. So we set up a channel in Reno. So I came over for a couple of months helping those guys set up in Reno.
I'm sorry,
which was
for
a very interesting
Reno experience.
very interesting. And then I left there to go and set up another channel. But then that was 2008, and the people who were supporting and backing the channel pulled out because it was 2008 and the money just went. So I scrapped around, thought, what shall I do? What can I do? So I started freelancing. And then I got a gig at American Express, And I thought, you know what, this might be quite a nice safe gig for a year until things pick up again. And then I was there for 12 years. And I literally left there about 2 weeks ago. And I've set up on my own, basically. So I worked for Accertify, many of your listeners may know, and I was the chief learning officer. So I basically ran training across the organization. I ran training in Mexico, Australia, Japan, mainland Europe, all over mainland Europe, the UK, of course, Mexico, and the United States. So I'd come over to LA, and I'd come over to Chicago a lot, which is
Yeah.
where we're based, and essentially run soft skills development, sales, relationship management. And then the last few years, I specialized in something called executive presence, which is and storytelling, which are two really, I don't know if trendy is the right word, but they're two very popular subjects at the minute, executive presence. And I think in particular, given what we've just come out of, where most of us are used to now doing a lot more meetings and business and interactions over digitally, over Teams or Zoom or whatever platform. And I think what's kind of missing a little bit is as people come back together, is sort of missing that kind of, as I say, the presence, be able to be authentic and connect with people authentically and really tap into the hearts and minds of others. So as we're moving more back to quote unquote a normal kind of way of working, where we're doing more business face to face, then there's a real need for it. So I'm specializing in those two areas. And I always say that, people who are in my field come from one of three backgrounds. They either have been in learning development their whole career, and I know a lot of people who are like this. They say they're leadership, experts, change management gurus and experts, but they've only ever really worked for themselves or only ever really worked in learning and development. They haven't got experience of running a business or, and I hear lots of training professionals go, their stories are always, I had a client who, rather than I was in this position myself. So there's that. They're performers who can't get acting work. So they go into the corporate world teaching people how to have more stage presence, how to have more authenticity and more charisma, or they're business people who bring that experience. And all three have value, and all three do great jobs. I do all three. So I've got business experience of running business, dealing with suppliers, being out buying, it was jewelry. So buying gold and buying jewelry, working with suppliers, working with TV networks to get our channel onto there. So I've got that sort of practical business experience. I'm a performer as well. So I spent years on doing musical theatre, doing stand-up, the TV, the radio, and also podcasting, which is where we became familiar, as well as working at Accertify. And 30 odd years on and off of learning and development. So I like to think that I offer something pretty unique that in terms of bringing all those three things together. And I've been doing it for years, right? So, and I've trained people literally about, over 1,000 people in executive presence and storytelling all over the world. And I have to tell you, Jordan, those skills are equally applicable in any walk of life and in any culture, from the folks I work with in Japan to the folks in India, and you tweak it slightly because of cultural norms and the way that people do business, right? So, but those skills essentially about being authentic and connecting with people and being yourself really resonate. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. I've just started doing that the last few weeks. So I'm busily trawling LinkedIn and sending unsolicited marketing sales message DMs to people that I used to despise getting, but now I feel really guilty because I'm doing it myself.
Yeah, but I mean, you have to, especially when you're starting your brand. And I think that what you were talking about there, where there's like the three different types of folks that do this work, that was really resonating with me. Like I've done a lot of workshops, obviously, throughout my entire career. I did some of the Robert Fritz stuff, which is a consultant now over in Vermont. His managerial moment of truth, as well as a lot of his art stuff. I think that he had a pretty cool tie-in with like how to get in touch with like your creative side and everything, and then how to apply that into your professional life. But one of the things I think that for me personally that I've tried to work on the last few years, probably last 5 or 6 years, is the Robert Greenleaf situation, or the not situational leadership. I'm sorry, servant leadership.
Yeah.
Robert Greenleaf there, and he basically the theory is there's 5 pillars, and at the end it boils down to you're there to support your employees, and that's something that really has resonated with me. I have had a lot of different teams, a lot of diverse teams, which I'm super proud of, and not a lot of turnover in my teams. Obviously there's always going to be people that don't always agree with what how I run my team and those sorts of things, but
Yeah.
I think that's served me pretty well. But I will say, as far as executive presence, that's something that my first boss that I had at Ticketmaster was really like driving home for me.
Yeah.
Is like through my growth, like as you start as a regular employee, you come in at this entry level, you start to work, you get your rhythm. You either have an aptitude to go into management or kind of to stay as an individual contributor. I took the management track and started going that route, but it is a lot of it is stuff that you learn along the way and through
Hmm.
experience, but there are things that you can polish. And I
Yeah.
remember she would always like sit in a room with me, and on her whiteboard she's like, I'm going to work on your executive presence. My goals were always executive presence. And
Mm.
like that sounds great, it sounds great on paper, but like what does that really mean? Am I going to be in a room with like the executives? Am I going to be like, what does that mean? And it's more than just dressing. It's how you convey the information, and I'm sure you know all that, and we can talk about that in a minute, and how that works out. But that's something that really really resonated with me, was the executive presence, and then how to storytelling, and especially at companies like Ticketmaster, where there's large companies where we have a large parent company. How does your piece fit into the overall picture? And you need to tell that story. Like when a C level is looking at a slide deck, like they don't want to see a whole bunch of words.
Yeah.
Like, and now that I'm in a position where I'm starting to come into like the low level executive thing, I agree. Tell me
Yeah.
what this slide says. Like, what is the story? Where do we start? Where are we at? What's our current reality? All these things. So like I'm blending a lot of my management stuff inside, like from all the things, all the pieces that I've learned. I've taken chunks of that and applied it, and I think I've found a pretty good way. But I do appreciate, like I said earlier, that businesses are making this investment in their learning and development piece of the business to continually grow and educate their leaders to be better leaders. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, like they bring in different groups. You're walking on coals, whatever you got to be doing. But I think that a lot of like the core of these things is really good, and like the networking and like the getting people together where you can candidly speak in an environment about issues and is so valuable to organizations.
Yeah. So it's interesting. One of the things, one of the very first day I started at American Express, my leader at the time said, "I want you to start thinking about the job you want in 3 years." And I was like, "What?
I
Why?"
think we had the
And
same boss.
yeah, right. So I said, "Well, why is that?" He said, "Well, the philosophy and ethos at American Express is they like people to go across business units, learn the whole business, because it will make them more effective. So rather than sort of specializing, and that's great. So you do learn leadership skills that you can apply across the organization, and that's very highly valued. The downside, of course, then is you get people managing functions who know nothing about the function that they're managing, and and it depends on the individual. But you simply get people then who come into a leadership role who don't have the experience or knowledge or skills in that area. And I've had a couple of bosses like this who don't have anywhere near my skills and experience and knowledge, and they simply want to tick the box and get a attaboy from their boss. So it would, so they don't apply some of the things. So the example, because I come from a consultancy background, and I've got the consultancy mindset, which is around inquiry, active inquiry, and action research. So it's someone says, I want some training, and I ask why, and say, well, because this thing is happening. So I say, well, okay, so and you're assuming that training is the answer. Well, let's look at all the environmental factors and economic factors and everything else that go around it and determine. Sure, training may be one aspect of that, but if there are tons of other environmental factors that are affecting the output, then training's not going to answer that. So I'm not, my salespeople aren't selling enough. Give them sales training is the usual one. Okay, well, we can do, but I assume, given that they're experienced salespeople, they've probably had 20 different sales trainings. So I'm either going to regurgitate the stuff they've already done or completely change their philosophy and the way they go about it. Now, systems and processes and maybe even technology needs to change if I'm going to do that. So let's do some more inquiry. And I've had bosses who've come in and gone, They want, someone was we want some training, and the boss has said, how many training do you want? They said, we want 4 training, and then that person said, Steve, can you do 4 training on this? And it's like, well, why are we doing training? So there's a downside to that too, in terms of it'll take 3 years to build up some level of skill and knowledge and experience, and then by the time that you've done that and you're actually doing the job effectively, you're off, kind of thing. So there's kind of 2 sides to that coin, I guess.
Yeah, that's really, really. I love the inquiry part, like
Mm.
the why, because I think like so much in the modern, like with Workday on back end systems, you come into an organization and then you just get assigned a training course. Like
Yeah.
here's a module, take it, and they have all of these things. Like I think especially during like through COVID and stuff, a lot of like social and cultural things were happening. So a lot of trainings were being done, but they were just assigned, and people weren't having those difficult conversations that they needed to have.
Yeah.
And I think that when you get in and you really explore the whys of things, like the underlying issues of what is really leading to this is a big chunk that people miss out on.
Yeah,
So I
and
think
and,
that's
and put it. I was going to say, put it in really simple terms. You looking at the sales thing. So, why aren't my salespeople making enough sales? Is the market down? Are there competitors that are doing it better, cheaper, faster than we are? Um, uh, what's the marketing spend? Are we spending and putting our attention in the right places? What's our sales pipeline look like? What's the conversion rate from appointments to signed deal to whatever? How are we qualifying our leads? All of that type of stuff that goes beforehand, wasn't being looked into and wasn't being researched. The assumption was we're doing everything that we did do and it worked in the past, therefore it should work now. So just give them some more training, kind of thing. That's, looking at that solution when really, training is probably the last thing that they possibly need. They just need to be taught to use the systems that there already are available correctly, making sure their pipeline and making sure Salesforce or whatever platform that they're using is populated correctly, and the marketing's on point. As the marketing change, what's the marketing message, what's the value proposition, has that changed, etc., etc.
I always hate so much when like either I join an organization or I talk to a new team or I change a process and they say, well, that's not how we do it, we've always done it like.
Yeah.
And the reason that we're even sitting in that room having this conversation is because the way you've always done it isn't working anymore. Like you
Yeah.
have to evolve, you have to change, you have to adapt. And I think that that's great, like, especially with like how products change and all of that. Like the product that you had that was awesome 10 years ago might not be awesome now, and
Yeah.
somebody else might have had an innovative product now. And how are you going to adapt? So you can't be on the salespeople. Picking up the phone more times isn't going to result in more sales, like
Yeah.
definitely. I love that, where you have to look at the whole life cycle of it.
And
So
I wouldn't say Certify was good at this because in the early days in the fraud landscape, there were only maybe 3-5 players, right?
I
And
remember that.
Certify used to be the sexy young thing on the block, and then obviously that changed because that's just the nature of business. And they were one of the things that they were great at was making everything bespoke, and that was what people were attracted to because
Hmm.
we can do this, we'll change this, we'll change that. But of course, that takes an awful lot of time and investment from a developer's point of view, and programming and coding and support and all that sort of stuff. And that was very labor intensive. And that was fine when you've got 10 clients. Then when you've got 50, 100, 200, 1,000 clients, you can't do that. So you've
Yep.
got to adapt and change. And Certify were good at spotting that. As particularly with a lot of, particularly sort of, people going through their second or third round of funding, they basically try to buy the market. Young, sexy players say, we can do everything that Certify does. We'll use AI, we'll use machine learning,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
we'll do it cheaper because we're not labor intensive. We've not got manual intervention and manual review and all that sort of stuff. We'll do it cheaper. So they won business, which enabled them then to get their next round of funding. But could they do what Certify did better, stronger, faster? Probably not. But certainly on paper, it looked like they did. And again, because it's a new sexy kid on the block, that people kind of go, oh, their marketing is great, and they're basically trying to buy the market by offering low prices again, so they could get their level 3 or 4 funding or whatever.
Yeah, and then they go
And
broke and disappear, and then you're stuck without a
exactly,
fraud tool,
yeah,
and you got to go back find
yeah,
something else.
yeah. Or they live. I mean, I don't know if you saw the comedy TV show Silicon Valley.
Oh yeah, oh
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a really great depiction, I think, of certainly in the fraud space, of they make no money whatsoever, but there's lots and lots of interest and tons of people going, "Oh, your product is amazing. Let's give you money," and then it just gets spent very quickly. So it's an interesting thing, and I think leadership is desperately important in those times, and being able to be flexible and to be again, like you're saying, not if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So if you want to get a different result, then change something. The definition of madness being you keep doing the same thing, expecting different results.
Yeah, and I'm always known as the guy that comes into companies. Like I stick to the philosophy, like the first 90 days. It's another book. I mean,
Yeah,
I've read a lot of management books. Wow, that you need to spend your first like 90 days observing the processes and like the people, getting to know your people, getting to know the business, getting to know the why of things, because there are reasons why processes are done. Like there might be, like, even at my current company, like how we do our fraud screening has to be done in a certain order because of how our backend systems run and the flow of how we process our payments and how we send out the orders. And then
yeah,
how it was at Ticketmaster was completely different than versus how it was at Fandango or even how it was at Gift. Like new tech platforms have different options that you can do versus old legacy platforms where, like, Ticketmaster, for example, is super old, but all the other
yeah,
ones that I've worked on have all been pretty new. So I spend a lot of time trying to get to know what things are and why they are before I change. And I see so many times, like, managers, especially managers that have been managers for a really long time,
yeah.
like decades, they come into a business and they try to come in like Miley Cyrus, like a wrecking ball, just boom, rip it all out. Why are you guys doing it this way? We're going to do it like this, without understanding the underlying structure of the reason of that. And then it leads to frustration from the existing, like, team,
Yeah,
because they're not being heard when they're saying, well, we do it like this because, like, the
yeah,
manager's just not listening. They're like, I'm the boss, this is how I'm gonna do it, without
mm,
understanding. And then it creates this disruption in the processes later, and often leads to failure. Like,
yeah,
I think that one of the things that I pride myself on, I'll never forget, like, when I was crossing over into management, I was looking back on all of the things that I hated about previous managers to try and see if I could, like, not be that guy. And I remember, one of like a real epiphany moment for me was I was driving in a car on the 405 here in LA, super busy, jam-packed freeway, for those that don't know, absolutely atrocious. And I was supposed to be at my job at 10 a.m. We try to offset times sometimes here at businesses to hopefully offset traffic. Doesn't work. It's traffic all the time. So I'm driving in, and there was an accident, and it was resulting in me being super late. And this was before Waze. This was probably like 2010, 11, and I'm stuck. And 10 o'clock is approaching, and my boss there was super pissed if you're late, even though it didn't matter. Like, there was no
hmm
reason why I had to be there exactly at that time. But I remember I was like just pounding on my steering wheel, just angry, just hurting my hand, because I was going to be late and I was going to have to deal with, like, the wrath. And I decided, like, if I was ever in a position where I had the power to decide when people start and the consequences of when they start and those sorts of things, if they don't require a hard start time, I'm not going to require them to do that. So, and I apply that philosophy, like, not that exact philosophy. I mean, I do apply that as much as possible, but, like, that overall, like, the underlying issue of that is, if I don't need to be rigid about something, I'm not going to be rigid about something. Like,
yeah,
I give people, all of my people, I give them a goal. Like, it doesn't mean like a personal goal, but like an objective for their individual task that I need them to do. Now, that whether it
hmm
be like in fraud, like having the review rate at X, or having the chargeback rate at X, or responding to chargebacks in X amount of time. Those are like fraud examples. But how you get there is up to you, like, for the most part. I
yeah,
might put you some rails that you try and go on, but for the most part, how you get there is I give the autonomy to do that, because I don't want to be a micromanager. I hate being micromanaged, so I don't want to be a micromanager. But what I want is, when my people are on their journey, they're on those
hmm
rails trying to get to that goal, is if they hit a bump or hit a snag, then they come to me and say, "Hey, Jordan, this is in our way. Can you move it?" And that's what I want. I want to be the blocker
right,
remover, And
yeah,
I of course, like, try to be as hands off as I can, but while guiding the people, and that works for a lot of my folks, like a lot of them. There are
hmm
people that it doesn't work. There's folks that just can't live in that type of environment, and that's, there's nothing wrong with that. Some people really like to have a lot of directions. They need to come in and be told every day exactly what to do, and they have to go and do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. And those people typically will work themselves out of the organization on their own, if they don't like my style of leadership. I've only had a few people ever really quit on me, and I would say most of them, it's more economic based than
Right.
necessarily based on my style, but I do support my people. I let my people grow. Like all of my people, you can find them all on LinkedIn that used to work for me. You can ask them that, but I think that as I go through this journey to be a people leader, as I get more into it, I'm like 10 years in on it now. um it's it's just I've settled into my ways, but
Yeah.
I still am very curious. Like I got a lot of books on the shelf behind me here for like the CEO mindset. I got Radical Candor up there, which I know is like super popular. Again, it's like coming back. Like I know Live Nation is doing this thing called Rise right now, which is it's kind of like a repackaging of what Radical Candor is.
Right.
So you got to be emotionally like vulnerable to everybody,
Hmm.
and I think that sometimes on some of the parts on that they skip out on, well, you have to have a relationship with the person before you can just let them have it.
Yeah.
You got to kind of know somebody. So yeah, so you have a couple of different styles that you've used in the past, or that you kind of reference, that you've pulled things from. Can you talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, so a number of years ago, I studied a master's degree in something called Change Agent Skills and Strategies with the University of Surrey, with an organization called the Human Potential Research Group, and essentially, it's looking at affecting and managing organizational change from a concentric perspective. So you start with change of yourself, and then of the team, then of the organization. And so it always starts from within out, rather than trying to change the external factors before you've thoroughly changed yourself. So there's a lot of inquiry there in terms of and receiving feedback, co-counseling with peers and that sort of stuff, peer group work and that kind of thing, using mainly three models: neuro-linguistic programming, transactional analysis, and Gestalt therapy. So looking at creating organizational change from those three therapeutic psychological models. And it's really looking at some of those models. Well, I've a couple of models that I've used because they're kind of quick and easy. One of the ones is Kurt Lewin, his model around leadership styles, and there's a questionnaire that I'd sometimes go through with people just to look at their preference. We all have all three styles, so we all have. And the three styles being autocratic, which is where you're telling people what to do; democratic, where you're asking people, what do you think we should do? And then laissez-faire, which is essentially giving the person autonomy. And there's a questionnaire you go through: what's your predominant style? Now, if you've got someone who's brand new, of course, you're a bit more autocratic. You're a bit more telling people what to do, when to do it, how to do it. When you're democratic, it fits in more of a style when you've got somebody who's pretty experienced, or maybe has experience that you don't have. So you're trying to solve a problem, you're trying to create a process, and you bring in different people and you decide amongst yourselves. So I kind of think that that's very much a almost like a Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek
Okay.
Next Generation, right? Very different to Kirk. Kirk was a bit more autocratic, right? Kirk was do this, do that. Jean-Luc Picard was. I sound like a real nerd. I'm not that into
Hey,
Star Trek. I'm not a geek,
sure.
but Jean-Luc Picard would get all of his people in the ready room, right, and they'd all talk. He'd find out what Riker thought. He'd find out what Troy thought. He'd find out what Geordie thought. You find out what other people thought, and then make a decision on that basis. And then the final one's laissez-faire, which is basically, I guess, I don't know, maybe more of a Han Solo type of
That's
type
probably
of
like me.
leadership.
I'm reading
Yeah,
this thing right now. It sounds more like what I just described.
right. Yeah. So it's really around, hey, look, you guys, you've got the knowledge, the skills, and experience, and you can afford to do that when you've got an experienced team. So Lewin really is one of the sort of founders, or one of the sort of grandfathers of modern um, leadership theory and change theory. So he talked about the three stages of change, leadership styles, and he started in the sort of late 40s, early 50s, and he's one of those kind of Stephen Covey types of leadership gurus when people weren't talking about organizational change and leadership. And he comes at it from a psychotherapeutic type of background. So it's looking at what's your sort of predominant style. Personally, I'm more of a kind of the democratic style of leadership, which is finding the consensus. What do other people think? Bringing in other expertise from external sources, maybe people who aren't necessarily directly involved in the decision, but who might have a perspective, getting a consensus, finding out some different options, and then finally making the decision myself. And I certainly employed that when I was running the TV channel. because people, people had opinions, and it's because it was about jewelry, right? So I'd ask
Oh
people.
yeah.
One example would be I had samples of 100 different pairs of sunglasses, and I needed to choose 10 to put on the channel and sell them. So I got all the 100, and I got every member of staff in the organization during their lunchtime, and I gave them pizza. But every single member of staff to come into the room and choose 10, and then I basically chose the most popular 10, put those on the air, and we sold them. So a very trite kind of example, but I'd often bring in my management team if we had certain decisions to make, and I'd find out their consensus. And again, ultimately, I'd make that decision of what we were going to do, and it might be none of the suggestions that came out. I might just go with my own instinct and my own gut feel for right
Yeah.
and wrong. Sometimes I was right, and sometimes I was wrong. Um, so
Is
that's kind of
there
my predominant style.
is there ever like a hybrid between, like, for example, when I make like major decisions, like I change the software that we're going to use at a company, I tend to do a more democratic approach to it. I'm like, what do you
Mm-hmm.
guys think? What would you guys want to do? Like, you're going to have to live with this every day. So what are your opinions? Bring in like finance teams because they're going to have to see how the reporting works and those sorts of decisions. I make in a more democratic fashion. But
Mm.
I would say like the day to day, I run into more laissez faire.
Yeah.
That sounds so bad.
Well, no, I think it's appropriate. Again, if you've got an experienced team, you don't need to be micromanaging people. You don't need to be on top of them. If it's BAU, then certainly a laissez-faire approach certainly works. And I think for me, it's almost like how high are the stakes? If it's my ass in the sling, I'm more autocratic.
That makes
You know,
sense.
and I've been in that position whereby we floated on the Singapore Stock Exchange, and we were massive. We were 12 times oversubscribed. We raised a ton of money so we could set up in other territories, and which came with a lot of pressure. So I was sales and marketing director, and when it came down to why aren't we making more sales, it was my ass, in the firing line. So I was a lot more autocratic. So I would be a lot more, I'd have the channel on when in every waking moment, which is about 20 hours a day. And in my days off, my time off, the evenings when I'd come home from work at 8 o'clock at night, having been there from 7 in the morning, and I'd come home and I'd have the channel on. And I'd be watching. Why are you selling it? And I'd have the channel on one screen, and I'd have my laptop with what things sold from before, and I'd say no, and I'd phone up the gallery. I was awful. I'd phone up the gallery and say, you do not sell that piece of jewelry for any lower than that, the thing that's coming up next, because this is the lowest it sold, this is the highest it sold. You do not change, and I became quite unpopular at certain points because, at the end of the day, it was I would be fired, and I had to stand in front of a board, literal board members, and say why sales were down, and explain myself, and tell the people tell the board what I was going to do. And these were, for some people on the board were from investment firms because we'd listed, and we'd raised a ton of money and everything
Yeah.
else. So, it was really high pressure. So it depends on the stakes. So if the stakes are high, I'm leaning more towards autocratic. If the stakes are lower, I'm more democratic. And when the stakes are low, very low, it's BAU. I'm absolutely laissez-faire. Look, you decide, you make the decision, you get on with it. You've got the experience.
Yeah, I love that that you can go between those. Like, I think that that's super important because like when I was originally like looking at this when I was preparing this, I was like, dang, I'm gonna have to like pick myself to like exist and like thrive in this one category, and it's very freeing to me mentally. I'm just saying, like, me personally, to know
Mm.
that like I can dance in this one, but then I can step into these other ones when I need to.
Yeah. And it is a predominant style. It's not like you are always, if you say if you come out with the questionnaire, I am laissez-faire. It's not, and I can send this to you, and you can you can include this if you like. I'll find the
Absolutely.
questionnaire that people can look at. um, if you find that your natural tendency is to be more democratic or laissez-faire or autocratic, again, it doesn't mean that you can't do those other ones. It's just that that's your natural tendency. And I know managers that I've worked with who are, and senior leaders who are extremely laissez-faire all the time, and it's desperately frustrating because you want them to make a decision rather than be Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, cool. I guess you know the business, you know what's what. You get on with it, and you want someone to say, "I disagree," or "I think we should maybe do this," or at least inquire and ask. Well, I'm just curious. Why is it you're doing it that way? Is there a better way we can do it? And challenge. I personally I much prefer sort of that style of being led, a bit more sort of democratic, not autocratic, but a bit more democratic. Um, but and I've worked for entrepreneurs, right? And working for an entrepreneur, I don't know if you've ever worked for somebody in a smaller business who's an entrepreneur. They are wonderful to start off with the first few
Yeah.
weeks because they really get you on board. I've been sales. I was sales director for a health. Well, basically, they made protein. They made protein powder and
Hey.
supplements for bodybuilders, and they had a TV channel. And I was a sales director for 1 month for the guy who owned the company. And the first couple of weeks, he was brilliant. He was like, you're my guy. You're going to take over the company. I trust you, blah. And within 2 weeks, he was on my ass about every single decision.
They
And
always micromanage like
yeah, you don't
crazy.
want to do it like that. Why are you doing like this? I wouldn't have done it like that. And it was like, do you trust me or not? So started off appearing to be very laissez-faire, but then immediately became autocratic if I was suggesting things or executing plans things that he wouldn't have done. Well, I used to think, well, you've got to this point and your growth is at zero for the last 2 years. In fact, you're losing market share. Maybe we should try something different. But it's that thing we said, I've always done it like this, and it's always worked in the past. And look at how many great sports cars I've got.
Yeah,
Well,
and
mate, that might be a clue in there in terms of how much money you're taking out of the business because you've got like Lamborghinis and Ferraris and Porsches, and you've got like 6 luxury high-end supercars. That might be something in that. Why growth has leveled out and is actually we're receding. So I've worked for people like that, and they again start off appearing to be one way, but are very much a different way. And being able to traverse those different styles, again, depending on the situation, I think is important. And again, being one style all the time, I guess there's a comfort in that because you always know how to deal with someone who's always autocratic or always laissez-faire. But it's desperately frustrating. There's downsides to each of these styles. Again, being a democratic, there's downsides to the democratic side of things when stakes are high. We haven't got time to sit around and get everyone's opinion, make a freaking decision.
yeah.
And similar with, the downside, obviously, of an autocratic. And none of these have got any value judgment in them. It's not bad to be one or the other. But being an autocrat is really needed sometimes when the stakes are high. And a very trite example would be you want a firefighter to be autocratic. You know what
That's
I
an
mean?
excellent example right
You know what I mean?
there.
When he's
Yeah.
busting through your door, you want a coach on a football team. When you're in, well, I'll use a baseball analogy. When it's the bottom of the ninth, right? You don't want to sit around. Hey guys, what should we do? You
Yeah,
want
should we put
someone
a different
to,
picture in? Yeah.
yeah, exactly, to grab the game and the team by the what's and sort of go, no, this is what we're doing. I'm putting this person in, and we're going to go for whatever.
Those are excellent examples. Yeah, the football one. That was good. That was a good change up there, because your
Thank
football's
you.
different than my football.
Well, I was going to use your football. Bill Belichick, I imagine, is not very democratic,
Yeah, that's a
unless it's with Tom Brady. Then I guess he was.
yeah, because then Tom Brady kind of just ran that team too. I like when they'd yell on the sideline.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've been seeing, and I took a leadership class a couple years ago for a few days, like a seminar thing. It was put on by my company at the time. Is this new style of like, I guess we can call it empathy. So it used to be,
Mm.
the old days was, check your baggage at the door. You're here to work. Like, just don't worry about anything. Your personal life doesn't matter. And I think during COVID more than ever is the work life and your home life and like your emotional life is what I'm getting to, is blended. So I think that, especially with like the mental health awareness that the world's going through, I think that there's a lot more focus on making sure that people's minds are right, both at work and away from work. And I think that
Mm.
businesses are way more in touch with the emotional side of having people in there. So one of the things was, like they would always say, is like, there no longer is check your emotions at the door. It's
Yeah.
people are bringing them, they're wearing them on their sleeves, and you need to figure out how to not just like work around it, but work with it. Like
Mm.
have the empathy to like to have conversations with people if they're willing to have them, of course, but like bring the emotional side into a business. Have you seen any of that? Have you worked with any of those sorts of things at all?
Yeah, I mean, from the consultancy company I first worked for when I was 20, so that's going back 31 years now. I know it's unbelievable to look at my youthful face. But 31 years, the company I worked for was really ahead of its time. It was branded cult-like at the time because it
Okay.
sort of came. The company came out of long before my time from the est movement, that personal development, break you down, build you up type of movement of the early 1970s, right, from out of California. And it was very kind of psychological. It was very explore your inner feelings, the person, go beyond your limitations. And they used to do like week-long seminars, break you down, build you up type of stuff, right? So kind of a bit culty. And it was sort of born out of that. And again, long before my time. By the time I got to the organization, we were a telemarketing company, and then we branched that into consultancy. And it was the sort of the early to mid 80s, the boom in call centers. Everyone had to have a call center and a helpline and direct marketing, all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of where I started a lot of my career, in that sort of call center, contact center, telemarketing kind of area. And again, that's a very people-based business, and it's all about making sure that I always say the human being is as valuable as the human doing. So you're not just employing someone who's coming in to perform a task. You're employing a human being, and they have value. So they contribute to the organization. They don't just turn up and hang up their soul on the peg with their coat. They don't put their heart in the locker along with their lunch. So I've always very much for my whole of my working life, I've been from that perspective and philosophy. So to think that there are other people, or there's a movement more now to look at those kind of things is it's not astounding to me, because obviously I've worked in lots of organizations, but it is like, oh great, you're catching up to what's important in organizations, because I've always been there for my whole. I've been privileged, I guess, my whole of my working life, or certainly the beginning of my working life. That standard was set for me. And I think it also speaks to things like diversity, equity, inclusion as well, which is looking at, again, it's the human being inside, not
Yeah.
just their religion, their sexuality, their physical ability, the color of their skin, their sex, their gender, how they identify. It's not just about that. It's all about, I value you as a human being, not because you are this or that or the other, or this height, this weight, this religion, whatever. So I think it speaks to that too, which is I value the human being as much as I do the human doing. So it's not just your output that I'm looking for. I'm looking for your input too. I want your whole self, because that's more satisfying for you and it's more productive. Look, and we all have, I think, I mean, I'm not sure if I do. I think I kind of do. Obviously, there's a level of professionalism that I have in my work life that I guess I don't have, obviously, when I'm in different mixed company. So when I'm doing the podcast that we both know, I'm a very different kind of. I show a different, I guess, side of
Yeah.
myself, and that's a character that I play too, right? So it's not just that's not me being, me. It's a part of me. It's a character, I guess, I
Yeah, and
play.
I think that like me knowing you even this much, like I know I've talked to you at conferences, I see
Hmm.
you here, and I very much can. And even when you talk on that other podcast, it's the Ralph Report. If anybody ever wants to know, like that's how I came to know Steve. I'll tell the story real quick.
Yeah, yeah.
So I listened to this podcast called the Ralph Report. It is features Ralph Garman, who used to be on the K Rock radio station here in Los Angeles, and I used to listen to that religiously on my drive in to work. And I always thought Ralph was hilarious. He does voice impressions. He's really quick witted. He's really brilliant with how he approaches subject matter and how he talks about the subject matter. And I just had it's just an entertainment podcast, daily, hour long. Listen to it. Well, you were always on there as their UK correspondent. Have hilarious stories with all of the Spice Girls stuff, Daniel Radcliffe, like these things that you bring up that, it's like giving us news that damn well we don't know about in the US and don't really focus on, and it's hilarious. But a long time ago I had a certified come into my building to do some training at Ticketmaster, and they said they brought up these training videos, and they're like, "Yeah, we have this comedian from the UK who works for us that does all these training videos, and his name is Steve Ashton." And I was like, "No way!" Literally listen to his podcast like every single day. So it was a really small world, holistic moment. I shot you an email, and then we met up in Nashville, and we've been doing this ever since.
Yeah.
So that's a long story short there on that one, but that's kind of how I got to know you. And that other podcast, I'm aware because I see you when you have your candid moments on that podcast.
Yeah, and I
That
talked
you're
a little. Yeah, I've
with
talked a little
this.
recently, just in terms. Yeah, a little recently in terms of just kind of like struggles that I've had. I've just recently started my own practice, and that comes with an equal amount of trepidation, fear, anxiety, as well as sort of excitement too, right? So, there's a ton of stuff there, and I was. I was struggling a little bit, of feeling, anxiety around it. So I talked about a little bit about that on the
Yeah.
podcast.
And I thought
So
that
again,
was
it's
really brilliant. Like to be like it's hard to be vulnerable. And I think it comes back to like that same thing where like we were just talking about like having that emotional brought into the world. And that podcast has a pretty big audience. And
yeah,
it was really comforting because I've had mental health struggles with anxiety. I've had, especially when I was in the Bay Area, like I had to stop myself and say, there's something wrong with me right now, and I
yeah.
need to fix it. And to have that honest, vulnerable conversation with you, with that audience, is extremely valuable for people to hear, for people to know that they can be like that. Like it's
Yeah.
okay to feel that way.
And Jordan, I think again, going back to sort of being in business, I think one of the well, from my experience at least, anyway, certainly at Certify, the last few years, I do a lot of I've done a lot of work around things like so. I did a session that was great. We did it first of all on another podcast that I did for a while with my friend Carrie, which is a personal professional development podcast. We did an episode about coming back from COVID. We did a few exercises on that. It was one looking at what have we won, what have we gained from that. So a lot of people gained a lot of from lockdowns and everything else, which is I've really learned to take things into perspective, decided what's important in my life. I've reconnected more closely with my partner, with my kids, with my friends, because I've kind of felt lonely and I've not had anyone around. So that's been some of the things we've gained. Other things that we've lost too, right? So for some people, it was a lot more lonely and isolating because they were spending, because if they live on their own, like I do, they live on their own and sort of work a bit more on their own, that day-to-day interaction with people was lost. So there's been a huge mental health crisis on that side. So we really reviewed, what have I won, what have I gained, what have I lost, what plans am I making going forward. And I ran that session at Accertify, and I had a ton of people reach out to me on Slack, basically saying, what a great conversation to have. I'm so glad we're addressing mental health issues, et cetera, et cetera. And American Express is a really good company for that, for offering resources. And I don't know about you, but certainly, being I'm a guy who's 51. I'm not going to go and use those resources in my company to go and do that. I'm just not. I don't want to admit. I'll talk to my friends and family about it, and I'll chat to my mates and say, look, I'm really struggling. I'm kind of don't know what to do, and have that sounding board. But I'm not going to use my company. I don't want to have, no matter how much they say it's confidential, that sort of stuff. There's still a part of me which is reluctant to open up to my employer about that, right? Even though it wouldn't be my employer, right?
Yeah.
So tons of people reaching out to me saying what a difference it made. We did a session on, I was running some sessions on diversity, equity, and inclusion too, around what's unconscious bias, etc. And I had a few people reach out to me and say, look, I'm gay or I'm bisexual. My colleagues don't know about it, and I'm scared of speaking up about it when I hear them make homophobic comments, etc., etc. So I had a ton of people reach out to me saying it's great being able to talk about that. And I always share my experiences, because I think, as a facilitator and a trainer, it's important to do that and show my struggles and everything else. So I think that, that subject around talking about our struggles, our mental health, our emotional well-being, our mental well-being, spiritual well-being is really important, particularly given what we've just come through, where, we've all been through. I think we can all relate. We've not been on the same boat, because clearly, someone who's got tons of money and a nanny and four houses is on very different looking boat to what I am. But we've certainly been on a very similar journey. And talking about that kind of stuff is critical. Now, the risk in a way is if you're somebody who's trying to talk to a leader or a colleague who hasn't got that technology or equipment or knowledge or skills or experience in being able to deal with that, it can have a really bad effect. So if I'm somebody going to my boss and saying, look, I can talk about this stuff, and if I get an expression we use in the UK, mugged off, if they don't really respond to it, I'll kind of go, yeah, well, you can go and speak to that person about that, go and speak to HR about it or whatever, then that can have a really bad effect. So I do think leaders these days need to have that input, knowledge, and be given some input of how to sensitively and authentically deal with other people's challenges. Then I think that's absolutely critical. It speaks to emotional intelligence, that skill. And again, that's a subject that in the learning world and learning development world and leadership training and all of that stuff is becoming more and more interesting. And I teach people a bit about, I've been on a few courses around emotional intelligence. I'm not an expert, but the way I try to break it down is into sort of 4 quadrants. If you look at the pure side of emotional intelligence, there are 5 elements to it. I try to keep it to 4 just to make it really simple. So it's really around self-awareness, understanding what are my drivers, what are my triggers, how am I feeling right now? So it's having that awareness of understanding yourself, understanding your thoughts, understanding that your thoughts aren't necessarily reality. So when you're thinking about, terrible thing's happening, because, we tend to think the worst, very few of us go, oh my God, what happens if it all goes right? Not many people think that. We always think, what happens if it goes wrong? We always kind of fear the worst typically, right? Because it prepares us, right?
Yeah.
So it's looking at do I know myself? Do I know my flaws? Do I know my strengths? What is real? I am not a horrible, awful, evil human being, being able to have that. I am equally not the world's, God's gift to this thing, but it's having an understanding. I am a sublime creature of light. I am also a total asshole. And those 2 things are equally true, right? So I can be that. I also can be that. So it's having an understanding of us and a self-awareness of the things that drive us and our failures and our mistakes and our victories, and treating those 2 things equally. So that's self-awareness. The second part of it is self-regulation. So being able to notice all of that stuff. So when I'm triggered, if someone pisses me off, if someone cuts me up on the 405, or if I go to the supermarket and I see someone parking in a disabled bay who is clearly not disabled, or someone parking in the parent and child space when they clearly don't have children and it's a Saturday afternoon, that I don't, smash in their windscreen.
Oh, I'm super guilty of getting involved in situations that I shouldn't. And
Me too.
This right here is definitely right now, I feel like you're speaking right to me. Even though you're literally speaking right to me, but this this is hitting home right now.
Yeah, so it's being able to self-regulate, to go, I am triggered by this thing, and I refuse to let it put me into unproductive or destructive behavior or whatever it may be. This thing happened today, reach for whatever medication, legal or non-legal, I should be doing, right? So that's one thing. Or I've just smashed a plate. Now I'm going to be pissed off all day. Or this thing's happened and now, it's ruined the whole weekend or whatever it might be, right? So he's going, no, this happened. It's fine. It's not the end of the world. So he's being able to self-regulate. So that's about me, right? So that's the first thing. So that's working inwards and outwards. The second part is working outwards and inwards. It's understanding other people. So the next part of it is understanding of others. So understanding other people's motivations. That person is not an evil person because they did this. That person is going through some troubling times, doesn't have the equipment, doesn't have the mental capacity or the intelligence or skills to deal with that situation. That's why they're acting out. So it's understanding and appreciating and viewing other people's behavior as simply that, as simply behavior, not that they're an evil person. So it's understanding other people. Then the fourth stage of it is then helping that person regulate their own behavior. So it's the first stage is understanding me and then being able to regulate me, understanding other people and help other people regulate themselves. So that's the sort of the four elements that I teach people. And and again, I can send you some links to this, but there's a number of different exercises you can do to find out where your strengths are. Now, I'm very strong in three of those. The thing I'm not so great at is self-regulation. I can't keep my mouth shut.
Well, it's
And
because you.
I think that may be similar to you, Jordan, which is one of the reasons we get on. I can't keep it shut.
Yeah,
Now I'm getting better at it as I get older. But
I'm not.
even, both you and I are fairly active on social media.
Oh
So if
yes.
I see something dumb that someone's put in, I find it very difficult not to engage. And oftentimes, I'm getting better at this. I'll type something out, I'll post
Yeah.
it, and then 30 seconds later, I'll go, what's the point? I'll go back and delete it.
I
Because it's like, what's
I'm
the
in
point? I'm not going to change that person's mind, particularly about,
yeah,
here in the UK, and I know things are somewhat screwy where you are.
a little
Here in
bit.
the UK, politically, it's just it's a dog's breakfast. It's absolute shit show. So I find it really difficult not to engage on Twitter, for example, when I see things put out that I disagree with.
I had to
I
leave
grew
Twitter.
up
I
with,
had to. I had to
yeah.
self-regulate and leave.
I mean things like food insecurity. So I grew up as a kid with food insecurity. At certain periods. So I know what that's like. So the fact that, there are more food banks in the UK than, there's more need for people to get free food than during the war, et cetera, just absolutely drives me insane. So I find it difficult to not engage. So I always come out less strong on the self-regulation. I can't sometimes keep it together not to say or do stuff. So, and I think, in part, it means, I think and I see the plus side in that it means I'll fight for other people too. It means I will fight injustice on behalf of other people. So I like to see that there's a little bit of a good part to that, even if it gets me in trouble.
Yeah, that's whenever I do get involved. It's always I tend to stick up for the little guy,
Yeah,
but the big guy never understands, and they just retort to their normal
yeah.
bullshit that they always try to say and talking points and those sorts of things.
But if you're interested in emotion intelligence, and I find it a really interesting skill, and it's really around, or EQ, emotional quotient. Um, the basic principle is that we have an IQ, which is an intelligence quotient, which is our ability to retain and regurgitate and do process thinking and all of that. Emotional intelligence is really around how capable how capable we are of understanding and managing emotions in ourselves and others. And it's a philosophy, and there's criticisms of it, of course, as there is with any
Yeah.
leadership management change model, by a guy called Daniel Goleman. And there's a few books that he's written about it, and there's a ton of resources online about emotional intelligence. And I find it really fascinating, and I find it really quite comforting that emotional intelligence, managing of myself and others, is something that is again becoming a lot more an integral skill to have as a leader, because people are messy. And these days, particularly with the great resignation that's sort of happening, that we're told is happening, people leaving jobs to move on to different places, getting away from toxic managers and leaders, and moving on to other things as they've taken time to reflect during COVID. I think it's really important to have that, at least an appreciation and understanding as a leader, the fact that because this person is upset, you don't have to fix them. You don't have to put your arm around the shoulder and fix them. What you've got to do is listen, and it depends on your skill level and experience and comfort level of dealing with that. And you know what? Again, this not the risk of sounding reductive. I think a lot of men, for example, find it difficult dealing with upset, whether it's from men or from women. It's kind of difficult, and they kind of shy away from it because they don't quite know what to say or what to do, particularly in a work situation. And look, it's tricky too, right? How do I deal with this person who's really upset? Am I allowed to physically put my arm around their shoulder?
Yeah.
Is that appropriate or not? There's some minefields and some a minefield to kind of get through. But I think simply understanding and where the person's coming from, what's their driving motivation, and it even speaks to things like, dealing with things like lateness, right? So someone who turns up late a lot, what is going on with that person? Rather than berating them just for being a terrible, shitty employee, understanding right, this person clearly doesn't want me on their back all the time. So knowing that I'm going to be on their back and yet they're still late, clearly there's something bigger going on. So can I understand that? And it's appreciating that. And it might just be that, they're really disorganized. They don't care about the job. Well, maybe have that conversation with them in terms of saying, look, I just don't get that you want to be here. So, why don't you, either knuckle down and get on with it or leave? You have got options. And I'm not saying you should do one or the other, but you've got options. So it's not simply about sitting down and having endless heart to hearts with people. It's understanding, appreciate, be able to take a step back and look at the wider context in terms of people's behavior, coming at it from an emotional point of view.
Yeah, I think one of the things that always freaks people out about me a little bit is when I have staff come into my office, and I try to. Everybody says they get the open door policy, but I will listen and learn. Like I will sit there and listen to people cry. I always have Kleenex and stuff in my office, but I think it surprises people sometimes when they're like, "Well." It surprises other people. It surprises HR usually when I allow my staff to openly talk about them applying or thinking about leaving, and because I want to know why. But I also don't want them to be scared to have those conversations. I want to know what are you thinking about. Usually it's monetary. Usually it's money motivated. But I will, like, let's say they want to apply for like an internal position, like somewhere else. Like the AP team or something like that. Like I will help them, like get to where that they want to go, because my job still as a people leader, even if it's not on my team, is help these people grow in their professional lives and their personal lives, feel comfortable coming to me with everything that they have. I know a lot of personal things about a lot of my staff, and they trust that information with me, and I think that it's exactly right. Like if someone is coming in late all the time, well, why? Well, it's because they're trying to get their cousin to school, because he got taken from his family somewhere over here and now he's with you, and you're trying to make sure that he has a good life, things like that. Like that's important, like that's something that would be important to them.
Yeah.
And it should be important to me too, because they work for me. And if there's a way that we can adjust their lives, like I want to do that. Same thing with people that are going through massive trauma, deaths, separations, those sorts of things. Like I need to be understanding. And loyalty isn't even the right word, but a respect that you get from a staff member when you give them what they need is just like unparalleled, like it's rewarding for me as a people leader to know like that my staff doesn't have to be stressed. Like if their mother dies, they know that they're going to be able to have time to go grieve and mourn and take care of the business. They know that, so they don't have to be stressed. Like I remember, like I've missed funerals and stuff at old jobs where like I'm like, okay, my grandpa died, but I can't ask for the time off because I'm going to get ripped if I try and ask. And like that's just, and that was just the normal. Like that was normal for everybody until a few years ago. And I think, like, I mean, granted, like this more emotional sharing does have its downsides, it puts people in awkward positions, but if you're able to navigate those waters and get through it, I think the reward is pretty significant at the end of the day.
I think so. Yeah. And I absolutely agree with you, because there are some people who will, again, as we say in the UK, take the piss. So they will, there will be people who will kind of go, and I've seen it happen, particularly, I worked a lot in the 80s and 90s in the call center industry, where you have young people straight out of college, their first job, and they know how to sort of buck the system. So they'll come in and they know they've done something terrible or messed something up, or credited a customer's account, or double charge or something. They'll have done something wrong, and it starts the waterworks, and they kind of go over the top, exaggerate what's going on to deflect that they've done something wrong and to sort of get out of it. Or they're late, 3 times in a week or whatever. And it's all like, oh no, I can't. No, I just need some time on my own. Please don't talk to me about it.
They want you to pity them versus
reprimand. Yeah, exactly. So to try and get out, and I've seen that happen. And so again, but I think the upside, and look, being a bit cold about it, I guess, happier, secure, authentic people are more productive. They are. So if someone feels secure and happy and content in their job, they will produce more. the ROI on that employee will be higher. So there is an economic, business benefit to it. They'll stay longer. They will have less sick days. So from a just purely sort of dollars and cents perspective, it works, as well as it's the right thing to do, from a human to human perspective. So it's a win-win, treating people with respect and, working with them from an authentic point of view, understanding where their motivations are, letting them know that, this happened. No one's going to die because you pressed the wrong button or whatever,
Yeah.
Getting people to have perspective on things and correcting unproductive behavior. If people are, an hour late back from their lunch, or they're taking far too many, cigarette breaks or whatever it might be, correcting that behavior, of course, but understanding the underlying causes of that. And I think understanding emotional intelligence is good. And as I say, I'll send you on along some links if you want to include that, so people
Absolutely.
can do an inventory themselves and see where they come out in terms of their strengths as well.
So, as we wrap up here, this has been an excellent episode. I think this content is really valuable to a lot of these listeners.
Mm-hmm.
I'm super excited that we were able to get this and do this. I was listening to you on the other podcast this morning, and I understand that you might be coming to LA to
Mm-hmm.
be doing a seminar. Do you want to talk about that at all?
That'd be great. Yeah. I so one of the things again, the thing that my specialty is in executive presence, which is around being able to authentically connect with people's hearts and minds in order to create a productive outcome for both parties. So that is from the perspective of in group situations, when you're presenting, you're trying to engage people, you're trying to influence people, you're trying to get people to come along with you. When you're trying to sell an idea, it's applicable if you're in a sales role. It's applicable if you're in an account management role. And it's very applicable if you're an SME who perhaps lacks that confidence in communicating. So at Accertify and American Express, I've trained over 1,000 people globally, and those skills are applicable in whatever environment you are and in whatever role you are. Being able to communicate more powerfully and authentically. And it's not about the mechanical behavior. If you look at any information online about executive presence, all they talk about is things like use positive language, have a power stance, all of that mechanical behavior. And it's not about that at all. It's about genuinely connecting with yourself and with other people, which takes emotional intelligence. And it's looking at things like being able to set an emotional agenda with people. Things like, you go through, this is what we're going to cover in the meeting today. We're going to talk about this, talk about this, talk about this. That's the what. Now, setting an emotional agenda is why. What do I want from you as an audience? What I want from you as you walk out of this meeting? I'm going to go through the results for Q1. I want you to feel really confident that the plan that we're putting in place to get us back on track is not only going to get us back on track, but it's going to exceed our targets for next quarter. And I want you to feel confident about that. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to make you feel confident. And that's my objective. So you're setting an emotional agenda with people. Now, as a listener, you kind of go, wow, that's all right.
I'm feeling motivated right now.
Exactly right. We talk about things like I always talk about executive presence. It's like having a software update. So a lot of people work out of an old modality, an old way of working in their mind. Many people are operating on Windows 98 when they should be on Windows 11. So they're operating from a stance of, I'm not confident, I'm shy, I messed up that one time and everyone laughed at me. I never get the promotion, blah, blah, all the negative stuff. A lot of people work out of that modality, imposter syndrome, everything else. And what I do, hopefully, or in fact, I don't know, even hopefully, I know I do, is help people get to that core of them, back to themselves, back to that confident place that they were when they were 4 or 5 years old. Because you don't get many unconfident 1-year-olds or 2-year-olds, right? That's when you're at your purest, before you've been spoiled and ruined by authority figures, by bullies, by parents, by teachers, by whoever has told you you're not good enough. So what I do is help people get beyond that and understand, hey, shit, this is really easy. My biggest fear was standing up in front of people and talking to them, or interacting in a difficult one-to-one situation. My God, this is far easier than I'm making it. one's going to be more critical of you than you, right? You are your own worst critic. No one is more critical of me than actually, my daughter's mother is probably more critical of me than I am of me. But anyway, apart from her, um, no one is more critical of me. If I mess up a presentation, there's only one person who's going to remember that, unless I do something drastic like pee my pants. But there's only one person who's going to remember that, and that's me. There's, if you're watching someone present, the familiar term Schadenfreude.
Yes, I am, but not. You might
Yeah,
have to
so
refresh my memory.
Schadenfreude is where you take delight in other people's failures, right? So
Oh yeah,
it's a
that's
bit
me.
like, if you're in a sports bar and the waiter or the wait staff drops a load of plates, everyone goes, "Hey!" That's Schadenfreude, right? Or if you see someone fall over in the street and you laugh at them, that's Schadenfreude. Now, the Germans have another word, which is the opposite of Schadenfreude, which is Fremdschämen. And Fremdschämen means where you are desperately embarrassed on other people's behalf. So
Okay.
if you're watching someone present and the slides go wrong and they start to get that funny rash on their neck and they start to stutter, it's horrible to watch
I think
because you feel for that.
Yeah, so I think in like when I do like panels and stuff like MRC, when I do see people's that I do that when I'm in those environments, like I'm
Yeah,
definitely the guy like if someone like trips and falls in the street, I'll laugh. But like when I see in professional settings when it goes wrong, I want to save them. Like I want to like, "Ugh, I
exactly.
wish I could bail you out of this
Exactly.
situation."
Yeah. So it's like when doing stand up, right? So I've absolutely killed on stage. I mean, absolutely stole the whole night of working with 4 or 5 comics, and I've been the best on stage. I've also absolutely died. I've been bloody awful. And there's nothing worse than watching someone squirm and suffer doing stand up because you're there to make people laugh. And if you're actually making people feel uncomfortable, it's the complete opposite of the intention and
Yeah.
the objective of being there. There's nothing worse than seeing that. So you have a lot of agency as someone presenting, someone standing up and trying to have presence in people. You have a lot of agency, and a lot of people don't know that because it's horrible to watch when you've not got agency. So when you've not, when you do mess up, the slides go wrong, and you start to get all panicky and stutter and splutter and everything else. It's horrible to watch, and we don't want to see that. So we want you to do well, but most people view it in an adversarial way. The old adage of imagine everyone naked, to get over your nerves. Well, no, don't do that. That's the worst thing you could possibly do. Be yourself, be in the moment, and be present. So I teach people about that. I teach people how to have engaging one-to-one conversations, how to lead a conversation using a technique called the conversation cycle. Teach people about the different kinds of questions to use. Excuse me. So, like, for example, when people are presenting, they'll go, slide, any questions, slide, any questions, slide. Now it's the Q&A section. Well, I don't do that. I try and teach people to be on the front foot rather than saying, any questions at all? Or,
Yeah,
okay, good, I'll move
I
on.
don't like to do that usually.
No, exactly. So it's asking pointed questions. Now, in order to be in control, and if I know I've got that troll in the room who always waits to the end to ask me that question to try and make themselves seem smart and go, that's all very well, but have you thought about the implications of X, Y, Z? And you go, oh, shit, I hadn't. So what I do is go, that's coming. That person, the troll in the
Yep.
corner who wants to appear smart, is going to ask you, try and trip you up. Well, head him off at the pass. So go, right, first slide or whatever the controversial slide may be, go, great. All right, I'm going to pause there. John, now you're someone who's got a very keen eye for what sometimes can go wrong. Give me your feedback.
That's so funny because I literally, when I do like my month end slideshows,
Yeah.
I always would call on specific people. I'm like, any questions, so and so, because I always know that they're gonna have questions.
Yeah.
They're always gonna say something. So that's so funny that you say that because I jump
Yeah.
right ahead of it too.
And you make them the hero, but you make them the hero as well, Jordan. So it's like, John, and the really important thing is you give a bit of information. John, you're always really good at spotting what might go wrong. Tell me your feedback.
That's an excellent tip. I'm
And John may
adopt
go,
that.
I'm not sure. And again, it's rather than saying any questions, saying what questions do you have at this point? It's a totally different, vibe. Right. Has anyone any questions? And asking it in that with that upward inflection. Please don't ask me that. Please don't ask me any questions. Right. What questions do you have at this point? is a completely different vibe from any questions at all. So it's little things like that. There's little techniques and things I teach people just to increase their confidence. Breathing exercises. We do some improv exercises. Again, to deal with the flexibility, because in order to, again, it's one of those things of like, if you're in a conversation or presenting, you've got your 5 points to make and someone throws you a curveball, there's nothing going to throw you off your presence than someone giving you something unexpected. So expect the unexpected and how to deal with it. So how do you deal with it? Do you do the thing of going, that's a great question. That's one technique of doing it. Or going, I'm glad you asked me that question or something. But there's a way of dealing with the unexpected. And improv is a great way of doing that. Dealing with whatever. One of the main philosophies of improv is yes and. So one of the techniques, one of the exercises we'll do is things like a yes and exercise. So you accept whatever's coming towards you, you change it a bit, and you pass it back, and that's you in control. It's kind of what politicians do. Good politicians, I guess, when they get a question that they're not sure about. I mean, Pete Buttigieg is just the best at it, taking what's coming at him, turning it around a little bit, and then putting it back to the other person. He's really good at it. If you watch Pete Buttigieg being interviewed, and good politicians, I think, are good at that. A lot of them are terrible at it, but British politicians in particular are terrible at it. But it's some of the techniques and those kind of things. So it's really around breaking some of those interactions down into component parts and looking at what is it that I'm doing now that's taking away from my presence, my natural presence. What is it that's taking away from how I am normally? I don't believe there's a such thing as a shy person or as an unconfident person. Oh, I'm a shy person. Bullshit. People aren't born shy. You learn that behavior. So let's look at the circumstances in which require you to be more confident. That's when you lack it. I always say confidence is like insurance. It's the thing you need the most when you have it the least, right? So, and it's not about faking it till you make it. It's being comfortable with being uncomfortable. So being able to deal with what comes at you from a perspective of kind of going, oh, that's interesting. That's a great question. I hadn't thought about that. Being honest and vulnerable. So it's all of that type of stuff, being flexible in your communication, being able to adapt style depending on who you're talking to, setting context, being on the front foot, being in control. So that's a really long answer to your question. But we're doing a one-day seminar somewhere in Burbank because we'll do a live show of our podcast in the evening at the Flappers Comedy Club. Late fall, so sort of the end of October, beginning of November, hopefully. On a Saturday, so it'll be sort of 9 till 4, 9 till 5. So it'll be an open course. It's going to be a discounted rate from what I would normally charge for a corporate client. So I think it'll be about $400 because I've got to do venue hire and LA is quite expensive for venue hire for lunch and all of that.
Yeah.
So that'll be them.
I'll make sure that when you get that all firmed up, that I share that extensively with the podcast audience here. Because I think that, I think this is going to resonate with a lot of people. And
do you know where I've had the most? Yeah, sorry, John, to interrupt. Where I've had the most success with this program is with sort of technical SME. So we have at Accertify, we had a lot of, as you can imagine, developers, technical SMEs, support, technical support. And they kind of got the most out of it because it was kind of going, this is really easy. I can, when I'm called upon to do an update on a project or a piece of work with clients or internally, and I go to pieces or I get someone else to do it. Actually, I'm going to start doing these things because this is actually a lot easier than I'm making it. So I think people who wouldn't normally go on these types of courses or be put forward for these types of courses because they're a technical person and they don't need to have interpersonal skills. Well, that's not the case these days, particularly if people are looking to move on in an organization and move upwards. Or interact with clients. I've had a lot of success. The biggest difference is, at least anyway, a lot of success with salespeople and leaders who think they've got it down and they haven't, because all they're doing is the same old shit that everybody else is doing, But yeah, it's a really interesting course. And honestly, my drive, my motivation, it is the thing I get immense pleasure professionally out of two things. One is performing. And secondly is these courses that I run, because to watch people have that light bulb moment where the software update takes and go, shit, I'm doing things much faster, much smarter, much more efficiently, effectively. Oh my God, this Windows 11 update is amazing. Or iOS 14.08 or whatever. is amazing. Things just flow so much easier. Where I've been operating out of a very old way of working, it's a lot easier than I've been making it on myself. So I get an immense amount of satisfaction, an immense amount of personal satisfaction from seeing that light bulb moment and the light come on in people's eyes and go, holy shit, I messed up in my communications class at college that I took for a semester and called a teacher mom instead of ma'am, and maybe peed myself in the, at recess when I was 7 and everyone laughed at me. Or, the girl who I fell in love with when I was 8 told me I stank and I had cooties or whatever. And I had this major public embarrassment. I'm not that person anymore. I'm a new and improved, better, more effective person because I've got beyond that self-imposed barrier that I put around myself.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to share all of your Patreons that you have, both the one with Carrie and your Lights Camera Ashton. Those are hilarious, by the way.
Thank you.
I very much enjoy those. I'll put a link up to your LinkedIn.
Thank
And
you.
that way, people, if anybody that's listening to this podcast feels that their organization might have some value out of having Steve come on site and do some seminars, like feel free to reach out to him. I'm sure that he would be open to having those things. He's got courses that he's designed that would probably fit very well in almost everybody's and every company's actual learning and development curriculum that they might existingly have. So,
And I think storytelling too. If I can talk briefly about storytelling, if you
absolutely.
look at, again, if you look at any course, and this includes the LinkedIn learning stuff, which some of it's okay, some of it's just dreadful. They always talk about something, the hero's journey. Well, it's always, you have a protagonist, they face a challenge, they overcome the challenge. Well, that's one type of story. And there are a number. Robert Booker, a great author and journalist, wrote a book all about the different types of stories and the emotional and chemical and neurological effect that they have. And he said there are basically sort of 7 types of stories. If you think of, I don't know if you are into Better Call Saul.
I did the first season. I haven't done the later
Oh,
seasons.
okay.
Yeah.
So Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad, The Sopranos, any really good TV from the last 10 years is not about a hero's journey. Tony Soprano is not a hero. Walter White, not a hero. Saul Goodman, not a hero. They don't go on a hero's journey. And yet they're the most compelling and interesting TV we've had
Yeah.
probably ever.
Yeah, I'm big into Breaking Bad. I was
Yeah.
all about that one.
Walter White is not a hero. He starts off, maybe you empathize with him, but he's a murderer, he's a mass criminal. And his journey is not a hero's journey in the slightest. Neither's Jesse's. So, it's not just about the hero's journey. There are so many other ways of telling a story. And I talk a lot about things like the neurological, biological, psychological effects of stories, why they're important, the fact that they engage people. It's a great way of creating rapport and getting buy-in for an idea, using data to tell a story, etc. And I talk about the techniques. Again, I come from that performance background, so how to tell stories when you're selling. A lot of people, salespeople, use stories when they're trying to say, "Oh, interesting, you say that. I had a customer who did that. They said the same thing, and then they took our solution, and now they're finding this result." Well, that's one way of telling a story. But just being able to interact with people and engage them, because you're telling a compelling story from a personal point of view. You're applying some techniques, absolutely, but using storytelling in business, again, is a really important part of how we do business these days. And I teach people how to do that because, look, I've been a podcaster for years, a TV presenter, a radio presenter, stand-up comedian, and a facilitator and a leader. So I've got all the experience you probably could need, other than being a journalist and a writer, right? But I write 20 minutes of comedy every week, so
Yeah, you
I've
do.
got some experience. I've been doing that for the last 5 years. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on this. I knew this was going to be a fantastic episode. Your knowledge on these subjects, which are very important to people, like is just second to none. So I'm really, really happy that you were able to give me the time to come on and talk about this. It means a lot to me personally. I'm really
oh,
excited to
mate,
see.
anytime, absolutely anytime, my friend. I'm a big fan of yours, and I love you dearly. And yeah, anytime.
Hey, thank you once again, everybody. I'm going to put all the links down there. Please reach out to Steve and have all the questions for him. watch his Patreons. They're hilarious. Just what a great episode. Thank you very much again.
You're very welcome. You're doing a great job with this too. You've really taken to it very naturally. You've got a very natural, conversational, facilitative style. So I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you so much. All right, everybody. Till next time.